So Eric Bischoff explains why he doesn't believe that AEW should be bringing outsiders into Wembley Stadium. This is what Eric Bischoff said on his 86-week podcast, and I quote, "I'm not so sure that I would want to bring in a Mercedes or even a Goldberg for a one-off like this. I don't know that I would do that, and I don't think they're going to need it, quite honestly. I wouldn't want the perception, or in this case, maybe the reality, of having to rely on somebody who's not a part of my company to help sell that house. I wouldn't even want Punk on the card. If I'm Tony Khan, I want to be successful. I want to have a huge event. I want it to be successful. I want it to be critically successful. I want fans to have loved it, and I want to have done it without someone like CM Punk, or certainly without someone like Bill Goldberg or Mercedes Moné. Nothing against them. In the case of Bill Goldberg, I like Bill a lot. He's a good dude. If he does end up there, he'll probably help quite a bit. Same with Mercedes Moné. But I would want to be able to go over there and do it on my own and know that my roster, my stories, my brand is what sold that event, not relying on somebody else." He continues on to say, "As far as Punk goes, I wouldn't give that piece of garbage the leverage. I wouldn't want him to think for a second that he is the reason that event sold out, or got close to, or whatever it is. I wouldn't let him even for a moment think that he had anything to do with the success of what I was doing over in the UK if I was Tony." End quote. See, now that is like really, really interesting to hear Eric Bischoff's kind of go off on CM Punk and Goldberg and Mercedes Moné coming back. And this is something that we are going and actively see in the IWC, especially when it comes to CM Punk coming back to AEW. You're either 100% for it, or there's a part of you that is against it based off of his actions at Brawlout whenever that whole situation happened. So some people are going to be saying, yes, CM Punk is going to be back in AEW. I think everybody knows that. Tony Khan is not going to allow CM Punk to just walk, especially when, like I've constantly said on this podcast, when AEW was first started, Tony Khan wrote down the number one name was CM Punk. So he's not going to allow his number one guy to walk away because there's some superstars on the roster that don't want to work with him. You know, it would just make no sense. And it is going to be crazy because Eric Bischoff was just talking about Bill Goldberg. And I could actually see Bill Goldberg coming into AEW because WCW was on TNT. Now AEW is on TNT, and I could see them potentially wanting, a old legend that used to be on the old WCW, and Tony Khan is a big fan, and so he obviously is going to want to get Bill Goldberg into AEW if he has the opportunity to, just so that he can play with him and put him in some storylines and have some fun. Crazy. And then with Mercedes Moné, with how Eric Bischoff just said that, he also doesn't believe that Mercedes Moné needs to come into AEW. She is most likely going to be coming into AEW at some point, especially with her being with New Japan Pro Wrestling. She could come in during the AEW Forbidden Door pay-per-view and have a match at that event. So that'll be really interesting. But AEW All In from Wembley, regardless of if we have a Punk or a Goldberg or a Moné, Eric Bischoff is kind of correct when he says that AEW needs to sell this just based off of their superstars, based off of the superstars that they have and the storylines that they have. They don't need to bring in a Bill Goldberg to make the event bigger. They don't need to bring in a Mercedes Moné. Like, we've seen it way too many times in AEW where they bring in people, and it's like it comes to a point where It no longer means something when it's overplayed and overplayed and overplayed. Like, you can't have it be a surprise when it's constantly happening, because then it's no longer a surprise. You're anticipating somebody to make their debut, and that just kind of ruins it. And I would love it where, AEW really did just make this just about AEW and just about the superstars there, because that was one reason why I stopped watching AEW a few years ago, was because of the fact that Tony Khan would not just allow his roster to just be the roster, So, really, really crazy. But I will keep you guys updated on if we get any news on Bill Goldberg or CM Punk and when or what his match is going to be at All In. It's going to be really crazy.